Welcome back to The Price of Business. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Continuing my conversation with U.S. Senator Rand Paul. He's running for the Republican nomination for president. And, it seems like Donald Trump is about all we hear about. Now we're hearing a little bit about Ted Cruz. It's a bizarre political environment. It's kind of like people with political science degrees these days are almost like people with computer science degrees in the 1970s, or 80s rather. It's like, what do you do with these? Everything has changed entirely. One thing we don't hear a lot about is ground game, because that's how people get elected, is that retail style of politics and the ground game. Kind of give us a little bit of an idea of what Rand Paul's strategy is for winning this nomination.
We think we have one of the best ground games in Iowa and New Hampshire. We announced just last week that we have 1,000 precinct chairmen in Iowa. This is the largest announced precinct chair, and there are about 1,600 precincts in Iowa, so we have two-thirds of them filled with our supporters and are working to rapidly try to fill the rest. No other campaign has had a ground game where they can announce that many precinct chairs. We have chairmen in all 99 counties in Iowa, and we have a lot of young people and enthusiasm trying to turn out the vote. Our headquarters is filled with hundreds of young people making phone calls, and people have come from all over the country to help us. We've also organized all 20 college campuses in Iowa, as well as over 350 college campuses around the country. So we think that a lot of younger voters agree with us that the government really shouldn't be collecting all of our phone records and collecting all of our credit card statements, and that invasion of privacy is something that shouldn't happen unless a judge has a warrant with your name on it. So we think we're going to do very well with the youth vote. We think the youth vote is underrepresented in the polling, and we're hoping to still shock some people once the election comes in a few weeks.
Does your strategy depend heavily on Super Tuesday? I would assume it does.
Yeah, a lot of it really is in February. I think a lot of campaigns have to do well. So we think we have to do very well in Iowa and very well in New Hampshire, and we're putting a lot of energy, and a lot of my time is traveling to the first two states. But I've been to over 40 states. We're on the ballot in all 50 states. So we have a thriving and growing campaign.
Mm-hmm. What would you say, besides the fact that it's heavily geared towards young people, which to me seems so logical, what are some other things that makes your campaign unique? Obviously your message as well.
Well, we also think that the message appeals to independents as well as Liberty voters. And the Liberty voters comprise maybe not a majority of Republican voters, but that's a growing segment. This is a segment of voters that believes in criminal justice reform, that kids deserve a second chance if they make mistakes, that we shouldn't permanently prevent people from seeking employment or being able to vote if they made a youthful problem with drugs or some other kind of crime like that. And so I think that opens us up to a whole new group of voters that may or may not have been Republicans in the past, but it also helps the Republican Party to grow, to show that we have some compassion for people who have made youthful mistakes. We also think that the discussion, particularly in the last presidential debate, of regime change, whether or not it's a good idea to topple Assad in Syria, will that make us safer? Will it make terrorism greater? These are really important debates to have, and I've been arguing for a couple of years that it's a mistake to give arms to the Islamic rebels in Syria, because a lot of those arms are finding their ways into the hands of ISIS, and also because if you bomb Assad or insist that Assad must go, I think it allows ISIS to grow, and it gives them a place to grow. And I'm concerned if you topple Assad that you may well have ISIS in charge of all Syria, and that would be a worse scenario than what we have now.
Yeah, I think there's truth to that. We got to take another break here. When we come back I want to talk a little bit in our final segment together about your foreign policy, because, there seems to be two extremes operating, one of which this idea of the U.S. as an ostrich and stick his head in the sand, and this idea of the United States being the world's cop. And to me, there seems to be a third way, and I think your foreign policy epitomizes that. I want to talk about that and a few other items here on The Price of Business. Again, U.S. Senator Rand Paul, he is a guest on today's program. Delighted to have him here on the program. We're going to have more for you after this on The Price of Business. Welcome back to this already, the final segment of today's Price of Business, the special best stuff from the radio on the TV segment with Rand Paul, U.S. Senator from Kentucky and a Republican candidate for the nomination of that party. Senator Paul, there is to me a third way in foreign policy, and frankly, I think your message both on foreign policy and civil liberties, you're making the Bill of Rights almost, I would think, centerpiece of your campaign, are so crucial. Americans are trading security, freedom rather, for security en masse, and I'm afraid they're going to get neither. And your foreign policy seems to be the only one that addresses that. Talk about that. And not foreign policy alone, but domestic policy as well.
Well, I think there's a spectrum on foreign policy from being nowhere any of the time and saying we are just going to remain here behind our oceans, and then that would be isolationism. And then the other extreme, though, is that we're everywhere all the time. And I think that's closer to where our foreign policy has been recently, is that we've considered that every civil war was worth our getting involved with, but often the unintended consequences come that when we involve ourselves everywhere all the time, sometimes we topple people in the Middle East and we wind up with something that's worse. So like in Libya, you had Hillary Clinton and Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush all saying it's a good idea to topple Gaddafi. Now they're saying the same about Assad. But I'm afraid what we got in Libya was worse. Our ambassador was assassinated. It's a failed state now, and a third of Libya pledges allegiance to ISIS. So I think really we do have to have a question, is there a middle ground? And actually, I was a big fan of Reagan growing up. You and I grew up in the Young Conservatives of Texas. I grew up about an hour away down in Houston and went to school at Baylor. But I was a fan of Reagan and went to the National Convention in 1976 when our family and my dad was a delegate for Reagan. And I think that Reagan actually occupied more of a middle ground. He believed in peace through strength, a strong national defense, a strong deterrent. But he also kept open lines of communication. He was not a diplomatic isolationist like some of the neoconservatives are today. He kept lines of communication open with Gorbachev and actually negotiated some of the reduction in the nuclear arsenal. But he did it from a position of strength and with verifying that the Russians were behaving and adhering to the protocol.
Yeah, absolutely. No question about it. What about on the civil liberties front? I noticed particularly early on in your debates, you kept on talking about the Bill of Rights. And I want to remind a listener, there would be no U.S. Constitution without the Bill of Rights. People like George Mason of Virginia said, we're not passing this thing without those Bill of Rights. They're crucial to our liberty. Talk a little bit about how they've been neglected and how you would treat them differently.
John Adams said that the spark that led to the War for Independence was really that the American colonists were upset about British soldiers coming into their house, writing their own warrants, having what was then called writs of assistance or generalized warrants. So really the Fourth Amendment says that you have to, when the government wants to come in your house, they have to specifically put your name on a piece of paper. They have to have probable cause or suspicion that you've committed a crime, and then they have to ask an independent judge to sign that warrant. What I'm concerned with now is that in the fear over terrorism, people have said, oh, no, we can't do that. Takes too long. That's too cumbersome. We just need to look at everybody's phone records all of the time. We need to collect all the records in Utah and have them. Or we need to collect all of your credit card statements. See, people don't realize this, but right now 90 to 95% of your credit card statements are being collected by government. And if you were to look at a credit card statement for any individual, you can tell the majority of the time, do they drink, do they smoke, do they gamble, what books do they read, who are their doctors, what are their medicines, what diseases do they have. And that's information that's private, and I think a big mistake to give that to the hands of government. So I'm a big advocate of the Fourth Amendment and think it's equally important to all the others. Some Republicans, most Republicans have been good with the Second Amendment, but I tell people, look, if you want to protect the Second Amendment, you got to protect the Fourth Amendment, and you also have to protect the First Amendment. They're all important in protecting each other.
Yeah, absolutely. U.S. Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky, he's running for the presidency of the United States. And Rand, thanks so much for spending time with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. We'll do it again soon.
You bet. All right. When we come back next time, we're going to have more for you. We want to remind you the show continues 24/7 at priceofbusiness.com. Have a great day. Spend it right here on this station.